At this time, I would like to welcome Andrew Cannon and the panel of participant engagement and client and agency perspectives to the stage.
Don't just introduce me. Hi and welcome everybody. It's the tough slot with the only thing between everybody and drinks, more or less. But we're trying to cope with that. Just a very brief introduction to GRBN for those of you in the audience who don't know our organization. GRBN stands for the Global Research Business Network, and we're basically the global trade federation for the industry, which brings together most of the major national associations and regional federations around the globe. But no more about that, because we need to get on and we need to get to why we're talking to you today, and more importantly, why I have this fantastic group of people on the stage today, although unfortunately one of the persons who should have been on the stage with us today, Jackie, can't be with us today for personal reasons, and her colleague Stephen, who doesn't look at all like Jackie, has decided to, a little bit in there to step in for Jackie. So thanks, Stephen, for doing that. And I won't do any bigger introductions because in addition to these folks, we have a special panel, which is this lot, and even more people. So over the last couple of weeks, myself, and I would like to thank Andrew at this point for taking the time to do video interviews with a couple of clients on their perspective on this, because we really wanted to bring to SampleCon this view of the client as well as the view of the agency. And unfortunately, as we know, clients have a hard time traveling, so they couldn't be with us today, apart from Stephen, of course, who's just down the road and managed to make it in. But you know, it's really great that we could talk to all these people. So we're going to play some video and some audio files throughout the panel discussion. The audio is a bit come and go, so please try and pay attention to what they're saying as we go along. And then we're going to intersperse that with hopefully a lively discussion from our panelists on stage. And you guys, obviously in the audience, are welcome to join in the discussion. So how does that sound? Does that sound good? Good, let's hit it. So first of all, it's your job. Well, I'll ask the panel first. Raise your hands if you think it's important, participant engagement. Hey, whoa, I picked a good panel. Good. What about the audience? How many of you think? Okay. So this is the challenge, okay? We're preaching to the converted to some extent, but I think we're going to know at the end that we're not all quite converted yet. So what do clients think? And, you know, one of the clients we talked to, you can read here, I'm not going to read it for you, but said fantastically important. And now let's listen to a couple of clients and what they say.
Yeah, of course, very important. Yeah, I mean, I just think the more you frustrate people and don't make it enjoyable, you're not going to get quality responses. The actionability of my results, which is what we're all driving towards.
Surveys, especially our satisfaction surveys, that really is another touch point that we have with our customers. So I do think it's really important.
I think it's, I think first and foremost, it is probably the most important thing and one of the things I am most concerned about.
Think of respondent data quality and just sort of the whole respondent experience when they're taking surveys. It's really, to me, it's becoming increasingly more important just because of the fact that, you know, people are, you know, they're taking these surveys on mobile devices, they're taking them, you know, their sort of expectation now is that they're going to be shorter, that they're going to be more, the surveys themselves will be more interesting or almost entertaining for them to take. And I think that we owe it to the people taking these surveys to deliver a better experience for them, something that they're going to feel engaged with, something they feel like, you know, throughout the process, like, well, that was actually really interesting. I kind of enjoyed taking that survey, as opposed to it being on the back end where they kind of question whether or not they want to participate in market research anymore. I think it's a more important issue than we currently make out to be.
So, you know, the clients that we spoke to think unanimously it's important, which it's a bit of a pushback, I think. You know, I hear too often when I speak with sample providers and agencies, well, clients don't care about this issue. And I'm just going to hold the panel for one more moment because I want to just talk about a little thing connected to that, if I can. We're not moving. Thanks. So it's important, but does it impact quality? And that's going to be the question, guys, I'm going to want you to talk about in a minute. But first, we're going to let one more client talk to us. If we can move forward, please. I've lost the clicker. So yes, saying it's important.
So in a lot of the work that I do, I get very concerned about someone's engagement and their, their emotional construct, their emotional state when they're evaluating whatever I'm giving them to manage. So the longer the study and the less they feel engaged, you see data quality trend down as you do different analyses.
You know, the data quality aspect of it, right? So, you know, you tend to hear things a lot like, you know, a really long survey can, you know, you start to see drop off in responses, and the data can be a little bit less reliable in terms of, you know, how you expect people to respond. And while I believe that's true with long surveys, I think that's also true with surveys that are just poorly designed. You just, you know, you're getting responses that you don't really know for sure if they're good or not.
And one last client. Well, that looks like
I mean, I think the ideal is that this is something that everybody in the industry really needs to think about and frankly be obsessed with, because you know you're right. It's garbage in, garbage out. If you're consistently giving respondents a bad experience, they're either going to drop out, so you're going to have non-representative sample, and you're not going to know it, or you know you're going to bore people and they're going to give you nonsense data, and again, you're not going to know it.
So, Stephen, tell us a bit first from your opinion. Can you sort of relate to what they're saying here?
Yeah, absolutely. Before I got into market research for the purposes of product development, I worked in customer experience. I did about 5.5 years of that. And I used to preach, you know, is this survey for us or is it for the customer, right? So we would try and design these surveys as more of a conversation than a survey. We used to actually, back in the day, get responses back where, believe it or not, customers would say, you just want your KPI, you don't really care about, right? You don't care about what I tell you. They actually knew the term KPI. That's how notorious we were. We've changed all that in the last 5-6 years, though.
Okay, so it's having an impact, definitely. Yeah. Okay, Carrie, I know you work with Stephen quite a lot and Dale, so tell us a bit about how that sort of impacts the work you're doing.
Yeah, so, you know, I think when we think about engagement, I think we hear a lot about survey length, and yes, many questionnaires are way too long, they're way too repetitive, they're full of grids and long lists. And it's not just that they're long, it's that they're not relevant. And I think relevancy is almost a bigger issue than length, because if people are engaged with the content and they're engaged with the subject, they are willing to give you more time. And they're going to give you better insight and better feedback because of that relevancy. And of course, the giving a good survey experience. So for example, at Illuminous, we have a lead programmer, and of course he's an expert programmer, but there are lots of people that can program logic, but his focus is on the user experience and on designing the surveys in such a way so that it is about the person that's taking the survey. Right. And that's just his sole focus. He's not really involved with the clients. And so kind of having that person and having that separation is something that lets us focus on.
So he's looking at it not from a technical perspective, but from an experience
perspective. Exactly.
Andrew, how does that fit with your way of thinking?
Yeah, certainly there's no doubt that an engaged respondent gives you better information, and they get engaged when they feel that their voice is being heard. If they can contribute in the way they want to contribute, then we're going to get real information.
Right.
What terrifies me is when we bore people to death and then we have garbage and we just don't know it.
Yeah. So as they said, garbage in, garbage out, definitely.
I also think from the end client perspective, it's a brand touch point. I know that was kind of touched on in one of the videos, and that's how we approach it at RTI when we work with our account executives in terms of improving respondent engagement. We want clients to understand this is another way that your brand is being shown to customers out there. A bad experience could also equal poor reflection on the brand, which in turn can impact you down the line.
Yeah, and we're finding when we talk to clients also on the category. So one of the things they're saying, okay, well, it's blinded, so that doesn't matter. But the UX team, the CX team say, hey, we're still making a negative impact on the category. People hate all computer manufacturers. That's not helping our marketing team in any way that people feel badly when they've taken our survey.
You can usually guess it's going to be one of three.
Right, yeah. So the chances are you're going to get some bad feedback, whether it's your survey or not. Yeah, on that. So, yeah, we see there's definitely this impact on data quality. I think if we can go back to the deck and move through the video.
I mean, I think the ideal...
We can go through, thanks, to the question, well, who at the end of the day says the buck stops here, right? We all know it's a shared responsibility, but we all also know in practice if it's a shared responsibility, it's nobody's responsibility. So just one word from the four panelists at this point. Phil, one word. Or two if you choose one of them.
Ultimately, I do think it's actually shared between the client and the agency.
Okay, but if you have one?
Agency.
Yeah.
Agency?
Agency.
Yeah, and I think that shared responsibility is to the respondent, frankly.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's shared between the agency and the client.
Right.
Anyway,
okay. How do the sample providers feel about that? Don't you think that you have responsibility for this? Or are you happy that they're taking responsibility for this? Yeah, it's a good message. Yeah. We're happy? It doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt. Definitely not. So let's hear again a couple of clients talking about this. So one was actually talking about, well, if it is a branded survey, very much the client's brand being their name, they felt very much that it was their responsibility. They were custodians to their own brand. But obviously for the blinded studies, definitely the agency was doing it. So they're talking about stage 3 and 4, which is the BCG ROI stages. And I think that's true. If the client needs to focus on the business, they need their agencies to be focusing on this stuff. What's interesting, I think, if we look at it...
So if I'm thinking about this from a customer, lens, it's certainly the client. We're responsible for the touch points that we have with our customers.
Yeah.
The reality is that at least on the client side, we almost never think about it or discuss it. It's not really even part of our set of considerations when we're designing a study or interpreting results. And I think, I think of the current state of respondent experience really as a case example of tragedy of the commons, because everybody, is just in it to get what they need, but they're not really thinking about the overall good or well-being of the entire ecosystem. So, and I mean, as a client-side researcher, I want to care more than I have the bandwidth to be able to care about it. So, because ultimately, the industry will provide what the end buyers want. So, but from my narrow perspective, to me, the fulcrum point really is the research suppliers, because they sit in the middle. They're the customer for the panel providers, and we are their customers.
Okay, cool. So, really, Steve, this one's for you. So, you're saying it's a joint responsibility between you and the agencies, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what are your expectations, on the agency to be doing about this? How do you?
I don't think it's on the agency to do anything about it. I think it's more as a partnership. We collectively think about the respondent top of mind. Are these questions going to make sense to them? Mm-hmm. Are they going to be relevant to them? Are these questions going to, frankly, demonstrate that we care about the customer, right? So, for example, like 0 to 10 scales, I'm a quant guy, I came up on that. We all love those. They're great in multivariate analysis, regression, and whatnot. But, you know, if I'm a respondent, am I a 7 or am I an 8? I don't know. Am I hungry right now?
Right.
Like how, you know, Netflix does things where they'll ask survey scales that say, well, I loved it, I liked it, I hated it. Right? And is that scientific? Probably not, but people can relate to it. It's easier to answer. You're probably getting better information, arguably.
Right.
And you know, if I say that 75% of the people say they loved it, I know what that means. So I get more reliable information, and the respondent is pretty happy with an enjoyable experience.
Mm-hmm. So I think it's a difference, obviously, between what you're saying and what Seth was saying, where they really say they have a bandwidth issue.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're saying within your team, you've managed to carve out time to actually think this is important enough to spend time on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in a unique position. I have a great job. We actually prioritize these things.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, that there's those two types of clients, and there's maybe more clients. So let's talk to the agencies. What type of clients do you come across? You know, do you come across lots of Stevens? Do you come across Seths? Lots, no naming, no names. Careful. Lots of other types of clients.
I come across a lot of people that don't care and just want to push their answer through and get that piece of data, and they don't realize that they're actually having a self-defeating action. And I think that's really a shame. We have to do education. We need to go beyond just preaching to the choir.
Right, okay. We'll come back to maybe how we can do that a bit later. Phil, what's your sort of view?
You know, my perspective is pretty similar to Andrew's in that I think most of our clients are really looking for the data and what's behind it, and they're not, you know, some clients do think about that respondent experience. I don't think along the lines that we're seeing here, but it's up to us, you know, with the agencies to kind of like sell them on that. So.
Right.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that, you know, we have Stephen here, and we've had, you know, Jackie was going to be here, and they're definitely a rarity. They're very partner-oriented and collaborated when it comes to working with us on these particular issues. But we do have a lot of clients that not only are they not engaged, but a lot of times they don't want to listen to our advice, and that's our biggest challenge. And we try to bend and not break as far as when they are demanding to include things that we know will not do well, that will not yield good quality data. You just get to a point where there's only so much that you can do, and there's only so much that, you know, they're going to be willing to hear, if you will. So, you know, if anybody has advice on ways that they have been able to overcome that, I'm happy to hear it. But that's, I think, our biggest challenge is that there just are a lot of end clients that they have different pressures. They're just getting pressure from however many levels up, and it just keeps going down, and you just need to do what we're telling you to do. And so
Stephen, has that always been the case in Dell, or was there a time when it wasn't so important? And if so, did anything sort of change to sort of get that aha moment?
So I think my own personal philosophy developed as a product of looking at relationship data, NPS data specifically from customer experience program, talking to our customers, branded, hearing what they had to say, seeing the lack of enthusiasm for taking this, watching this happen in the beginning. And as we shored up the program, we would, in fact, when we looked at NPS scores for individual accounts, we'd show the response rate alongside each one so you could view that in the proper context and really illuminate for the business that, well, some of these accounts, people just aren't engaged and they're not interested in taking it, and why not? We even went as far as to not just promise that we would share things with them on the back end, but, you know, getting our CorpCom to put a newsletter out that was essentially, you know, this is what you said, this is what we heard, and here's what we're doing.
Right.
And so I adopted that philosophy, and we carry it forward today. I mean, I'll be honest, if Carrie was working directly with some of our internal stakeholders, she might not have a terribly different experience than what she just described. Jackie's role and my role is specifically there so that we can go tell the internal stakeholders, no, this is a bad idea, or no, you have way too many questions in this survey. Right. We can play bad cop for them so that they can focus on doing their job.
So I suppose the ask to the audience is, you know, how, whether you're sample providers or agencies, wherever you are in the value chain, how can you support people like Stephen and his teams in different companies, giving that point of view, giving that data to show them that this is important, that this does make a difference, and to push back in a way, not necessarily on a project basis, but more generally as well, to show them the value of participant engagement and why they should care, so they can take that message to their internal stakeholders. Yeah. definitely. Okay, let's see what some of the guys here said. A couple of issues I thought was interesting from these is one, yes, an expectation, but they have no tools. So how do end clients hold agencies accountable? For participant engagement, they have tools, perhaps for data quality, for other measures, but specifically looking at participant engagement, there's not really any tools out there at the moment that an end client can use to look at that. And then this high level of trust, which is great, that you trust your partners, but if they're trusting everybody, and we know not everybody does a good job of this, how do you distinguish? So Stephen, you know, you look here, you work with some great agencies. What about the ones you don't work with anymore?
Well, first of all, I say we follow a policy of trust but verify. So we're involved in the data, and we rely very heavily on, not solely on open-ended evaluation of the data, seeing that people are given thoughtful answers, that in combination with a number of other things. Carrie's team will take the data and pull out the ones that are obviously don't belong, and then we will work together to look at the ones that are, you know, maybe a little bit more on the fence. And so we have a very intimate view of the data. We know exactly what it looks like before we close field.
Okay. And this would impact the agencies you work with. So if somebody wasn't good at this stuff, they would find themselves falling off of your roster.
Yeah, I mean, we are taking a stronger and stronger point of view as time goes on with which panel providers we like and why and for what reasons. And the people that we work with are willing to be flexible to actually work in concert with those panel providers to deliver the end game that we're looking for. And we'll never work directly with a panel provider, but we almost certainly work with our agencies to find the panel providers that will deliver the best solution. So we are hands-on in that effect. And we may be in the minority today, but I bet you money we won't be for very long.
Yeah, no, I think, and everybody in the room hopefully is aware of the drive towards transparency that's happening irrespective of what we do individually. And I think you're ahead of the curve on that one and making sure there is that transparent relationship between yourselves, the agencies, and the sample providers. Okay. Let's listen again to a couple of comments.
My assumption is the people I work with are constantly thinking about this.
So I think it's interesting, you know, because from my experience of my life on the agency, I must say we weren't constantly thinking about this. We were constantly thinking about how we can make profit from making projects more efficient than thinking about participant engagement. So again, asking the agencies, you know, is it a metric for you at the moment, participant engagement, and could it be a metric?
It could be. You know, we're currently measuring, we do surveys at the end of all of our studies where we do kind of gauge respondent engagement. Could be an internal metric. We do kind of review it from time to time. We have the luxury at RTI where we do have a separate field department where that's all we kind of have to worry about is fielding and working with our sample providers to make sure that projects get ushered properly, as opposed to, you know, a lot of other companies will have the integrated project teams that also have to handle field, and that adds just more work. So we kind of benefit from that.
Do you share that post-survey feedback proactively with most of your clients? Because I'm willing to bet that if they could see the ugly truth, if they could see verbatim comments saying, here's what I thought of your survey, it makes your job a lot easier towards explaining to them, here's why you should have followed the recommendations that we made.
It's something, if they wanted to see it, we would share it with them. It's not something that we just proactively send all across the board. We're lucky in that, you know, across all clients, all surveys, we score pretty well. But again, that's, you know, if we were to look at it client by client, we could see differences.
Are they aware that data exists? Because I'd want to know.
You know, I believe some do. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head if they were all aware.
Okay, good question. Andrew, Carrie?
As far as, is it a metric for us? It's not. We spend the vast majority of our time, especially because we're focused not only mostly on B2B, but also on technology. So technology consumers, B2B technology, finding those types of decision makers. Our biggest challenge, and when they say clients don't care about respondent engagement, what they care about is being able to find the right people and know that those are the right people. That's our biggest challenge. So that's another reason why engagement isn't as much at the forefront as it should be, because they're not getting, you know, called out in front of their executives because of respondent engagement. They're getting called out because people don't believe that the data is representing the target audience.
So you got to put that fire out first.
So that's, yes, and that's what we spend such a large amount of our time doing. So it makes it more difficult to put engagement as much at the forefront, which doesn't make it right, but it just makes it a challenge.
Yeah, but obviously one of the things we find is that a disengaged participant's likelihood to participate in the next survey goes down dramatically, especially outside of the panel world. If they get a bad experience, next time they're going to say no, whether it's you or somebody else gives them a call. And those hard-to-reach audiences, can we afford to give them bad experiences? I'm not sure we can.
You know, we absolutely cannot. And we run a number of communities, 100 or so communities, and our colleagues in Mara Blue have 2 very large nationally representative communities, and it's absolutely important that we keep respondents engaged, because if they don't, they're going to drop out of our community. We're going to have to spend money to re-recruit. We may not be getting the right people. So there's respondent engagement is absolutely critical, and we measure it all the time, and we measure it through dropout rates and through response rates and through all sorts of non-direct ways as well, because it's just so important.
Okay, I'm going to sort of fast forward just a little bit, because I want to get us on to a couple of other questions. So let's just move through these.
Yeah, and I guess I think it's along the same lines, but I think, you know, sample providers might even have more of a skin in the game, right? To ensure, you know, a better experience, because, you know, they are the ones who are actually out doing the recruiting and, you know, needing to make sure that they've got, folks available to, you know, a good wide range of folks available to participate in surveys. So I think it's most important for them, even more so than, say, you know, market research companies and our clients.
Yeah, so an understanding that it is important for the sample providers, even if they don't have the direct responsibility. I want to skip this video, please, if possible, on to the next. Nothing against you, Andrew.
Well, the good ones will push back on me, and I like
please.
that. If they'll come back to me and say, you're just not going to get, you know.
On to one more.
Well, the good ones will push back on me.
Sorry, can we move forward? Thank you. I want to go forward.
Yeah,
And forward.
I think that suppliers always are concerned about pushing back because, you know, they want to keep the client happy. There's a lot of options out there.
Yeah.
Personally, if I'm in a situation where I'm trying to do something and the supplier says to me, hey, you know what, that's really not going to be a great participant experience, and we're kind of worried about what kind of data you're going to get back, I might not be happy at first, but I mean, I think that supplier would only gain respect in my eyes if they really, you know, explain to me why it is that what I wanted to do wasn't a good idea.
Okay, interesting point. So, Stephen, what about when people push back to you?
So I would say that if Carrie, for example, came to me and simply, and she would never do this because she's great, but if she came to me and simply said, we can't do that, it's going to be horrible, it's going to be awful, this is the wrong approach, I would probably get very defensive. But if she came to me and said, why don't we do this instead, or gave me a couple of alternative solutions to react to, then I would probably say, well, maybe not that, but maybe some variation of that. Let's split the difference and we would work towards something, right? But if you're just dropping problems in my lap with no solutions, then of course I'm going to push back.
Right. What about the agency? Do you have solutions? Can you sort of work with the sample providers to give these solutions? And
it's interesting. I haven't thought about it as, you know, working in conjunction with the sample providers to find solutions, but we definitely offer our clients alternatives and what we recommend. And I think what happens is when a lot of those solutions are you need, you know, to not have 30 attributes, and that's not what they want to hear, that's when it becomes challenging. And I don't know how a sample provider can help with, you see what I'm saying? But are there commonalities? Are there ways where we're struggling with user experience that the sample providers can help? I'm open to hearing that. but really it's very much happening in the design process and not really when we're at the time when we're engaged in field with the sample providers.
Okay. Cool. So let's continue that theme then to talk about, really what then expectations do you have on the sample providers, if any, when it comes to participant engagement? Andrew.
Well, I expect that they would pay as much attention to maintaining a vibrant community of people that feel that they're being listened to as we do. That it's really important that they think about keeping those people happy and not allowing them to get into, ask screening questions, get kicked out, ask screening questions, get kicked out. That's the kind of thing that we really need to put a stop to as an industry, unless we did want to just destroy the number of people that do surveys.
So there's two experiences. There's the experience in survey, and there's the whole greater experience of being a panel member, as Betty was talking about a bit earlier, and the way you can use different techniques to engage people when they're not taking surveys.
I know we work with our sample providers as much as we can to get them to incentivize panelists as much as possible. We can only control what we do within our surveys. Obviously, we have less control over, as Andrew talked about, the other studies that other clients kind of provide. So it's kind of like a funnel. With us, we do want to make sure respondents are compensated fairly, and the reason is, they're using their time, and that's the one thing that, they can't get that back. So we know by, incentivizing fairly, we do a lot of iHuts, for instance. If you lowball on an incentive with an iHut, they'll be happy to take the product and then not, come back. And there's a much greater cost to that because it's not just the cost of sample, it's the cost of product, it's the cost of production, shipping to people's homes. So we try to work with the providers in that way.
Okay. So I think, this is fine as a sort of a Venn diagram as how it could be, it should be. But I think we're all aware, that the reality is that we have clients, agencies, sample providers, and somewhere down there are the poor participants, the respondents. And the question is, what needs to change? If we're under the assumption that today, on average, and we know when we research people, 7 out of 10 said they've had a poor experience recently taking a survey, which is just totally unacceptable. So the current state of play is that people do feel they have too many bad experiences when they take surveys. So what needs to change, either in terms of the client-agency relationship and in between then the agency and the sample provider, that this becomes part of our everyday lives, that participants matter. How do we change? Stephen, easy one for you.
Yeah, it is an easy one for me. So first of all, we'll do our part in terms of trying to design a survey tool that's customer-centric, frankly, and not overly long. Jackie and I have been at this long enough that we don't need that explained to us. We get it. What matters to us is more than anything else is just that we've got representative, sample, thoughtful answers, that sort of thing. We understand very well that panel providers have significant headwinds in the way of bots or other people coming in, and that doesn't bother me. What I do expect is for them to make good on it in one way or another, and so that's why we work with people like Matchbox and like Luminos. Will work with us to make sure that we can get to a good end solution. I actually feel like we're in a moment in time right now where we're sort of using a stopgap solution. It's effective, but it's very, very manual, and we're waiting for the industry to come up with a solution that will help us move past the stopgap solutions we're using right now to ensure that we have quality surveys and quality data.
Yeah, I think the experience from a participant perspective isn't highly different from what it was in the year 2000. There are some slight changes to what we're doing, but if you ask the participant, what is that experience like? Basically, it's the same, right? Maybe it's a few more colors now, and maybe if the grids go a bit nicer on the mobile, but in practice, it's largely the same experience. So how do we change? What do we need to do as agencies? How can you navigate that change?
If you think about it, hasn't really changed since 2000. Think about response rates and how that's declined. So we're already seeing that we're killing our sample pool. So I think it's our responsibility to educate people to realize that the cheapest isn't necessarily worth it. that you can get super cheap sample, but it's not good sample, and it's not representative sample. It's not the sample you want. You're willing to pay for quality sample.
We'll pay more.
But we need to educate people as to the benefits of actually going for quality sample.
We'll write that down. The clients will pay more for quality sample. Underline it.
Yeah.
Steve's not alone.
And he's
Wait.
not the only one.
I'm going to say the same thing I said last year. Say the same thing I said last year. It doesn't mean I'm going to like double the amount of money I spend because I have a finite research budget. But we will do smaller scope projects and things like that, and maybe smaller sample that's not necessarily statistically significant, but we feel like the sample's solid.
Right.
Yeah.
And what about the agencies then, and when you're looking at your business relationship with sample providers, how does that need to change? Is the financial business model correct from a participant perspective at the moment?
For us it is sort of. I mean, we don't think, like Andrew says, we don't like to work with the cheapest people out there. We sometimes scratch our heads if we bid out with someone and their sample cost is extremely low compared to what we've seen. Contrastly, we don't want to work with, someone that's kind of like way over the top. There's an area, we know the types of work, the types of jobs that we do on a regular basis, and we have a pretty decent expectation as to what, we expect to pay for something. That's part of it in terms of that relationship. I think to get back to your point on, what do we need to do, and it's not just about, just redesigning surveys. I think we need to think about participant engagement and actually really caring about what the person is saying to us, aside from, you're checking responses to a survey. It's about making them feel like they're connecting with us. So when we do things with our surveys like sharing back, when we do our employee videos at the end of surveys where they see a member of our team kind of explaining, hey, thank you for your time. This is what you've spent, the last 15 minutes doing or whatever. Here's why it's important. Your answers mean, potentially A, B, and C when it comes to, what we're doing. I think that's also really important too.
Yeah, so it's not just a one way. And I think one of the things is that, we try and talk about, and on the panel I've quoted it quite a number of times, talk about participants and not respondents. It's a relationship. It's not a sort of a take relationship. It's a two-way.
It's conversation.
It's conversation.
Should be anyways.
Yeah. So relevance,
right,
is okay,
and design your questions to, for lack of better terminology, make sense to the lowest common denominator, right? So that they can be intuitive to a broad audience, and don't use highbrow language, don't use internal language, and think about how this statement's eventually going to translate into traditional Chinese or German or something else, right? So the more complicated you make your questions, that actually impacts your survey translations as well.
Right.
So it introduces more points of potential failure into the whole thing.
Yeah. Okay, let's listen to one last sort of client video that I think is quite interesting.
You have clients who are under enormous internal pressure to get results and to get them fast and to get data. Good, bad, and different, doesn't matter. Just get the study done. You have suppliers who want to keep the clients happy and want to get the projects done, and you have panel providers who probably aren't even really aware of what everybody might necessarily even be doing among their panel. So, I think that there's definitely a need for a shared commitment, because ultimately it's the future of our industry, it's the future of our function, it's our credibility as client-side researchers, and all it's going to take is for data to start not matching up with what we see in the real world, and I think that we're all going to have a problem on our hands, and the business is going to look at the research department, and the research department is going to look at the suppliers, and the suppliers is going to look at the panel, and it's going to ripple through, not in a positive way.
So collective responsibility, and we heard this morning about how taking action and change, and how our brains are sort of saying no is our initial reaction. How do we change that from a no to a yes and actually then do something collectively to change this issue? Because I don't want to come here next year and be saying the same things I said last year, because nothing has changed since last year. Let's be honest with each other, at least not for the good. So a year has passed since I last talked with a panel on this issue, and from a participant perspective, they're still getting the same treatment. What needs to change so next year we're not sitting here doing that? Any final thoughts?
I think we can only chip away at it, one action at a time.
One action at a time.
One piece of good feedback, one piece of engagement, one shorter question, one, to improve it. We're not going to, it's like climate change. We're not going to reverse it tomorrow.
Right.
But we got to chip away at it.
Each action on each survey, each client, each participant. Phil?
I think we just need to clone the Steven types of the world and have every end client hire them. No, seriously, because I think if you have those types of ambassadors at end clients, it ultimately kind of works its way up and helps everybody.
Yeah, a lot of things roll downhill, that's for sure.
And I also think that, at least from our perspective, from the agency perspective, we do want to engage more and collaborate more and partner more with the sample providers. A question that I've always had is, we essentially go to the same two providers for the vast majority of our studies, and why do we have to keep rescreening them? The screener is one of the most brutal parts of our questionnaire because they're B2B and it's technical and they're long and like this seems like something that we could solve, right? So we're willing to work with and partner with providers that can help us achieve that. And so I think it is just about being open to those collaborations and partnerships and making it known that you want to have those partnerships not just within sample providers and within agencies and within clients, but that we want to have those across the board.
Stephen, final word.
I would say I'm reminded of years ago when we were embarking upon, I was pretty new at Dell at the time, we were embarking upon a pretty significant initiative, and it's big companies, you might imagine. Everybody's got multiple things that they're working on. And I was having trouble getting people to buy into what we needed to go do. And I asked a colleague of mine, like, how do you do it? He's like, it's simple. You find someone who wants to work with you.
Right.
It doesn't matter so much who that is, but someone who does want to work with you. And when you get a working proof of concept, when you have success with them, the others will notice and they'll want to get on board. We're no different.
Right.
No different.
So I think that's a good way to segue into the final point is really what we at GRBN are trying to do our little bit as an industry body to do this, because some actions have to take place on a project, one action by one action basis. But I think there's also a role for us as an industry body to lead the charge, as it were, and to spread the gospel according to participant engagement. So I just want to tell a little bit about what we're doing to try and fix this problem. We're basically looking at two issues. We're looking at it as awareness and activation. So in terms of the awareness, those of you who know, at the end of 2017, we issued an engagement handbook, which is full of tips from the experts on what you can do to improve it. It's a gold mine. If everybody did at least 2 of those tips, we'd be much better off than we are today. And we're redoing this handbook in 2019, so if anybody in the audience wants to get involved and participate and contribute to the handbook, please get in touch. We'd love to have you. And finally, in terms of the activation, we're working together with the Insights Association to do a certification program. 7 companies went through the program as a pilot last year, including RTI here. So we know it works. We know we can help you create great experiences, not good experiences, great experiences. So if that's again something you want to get involved in and show your commitment to this issue, please talk to me at drinks or tomorrow, and together, we can make a difference. So I'd like to thank the panel for their fantastic contribution. I'd like to thank the team at the back, the AV team, because obviously we were working with technology kids and all sorts of things, and it was a bit of a pain. But we got there in the end, and thanks for the audience for being with us through this journey. And please connect, and let's solve this issue. I don't want to come back next year and say, it's the same, please. I can't do that. So work with us. Let's make a difference for next year, please. Thank you very much.